Hello, I'm Stacy Graham with the Teaching with Primary Sources Southern Regional Partner. And you can find out more about it at our website, which I'm going to put in the description box below. But today I'm going to do a very short kind of web tutorial that's geared towards people who work at museums and historic sites on finding Library of Congress primary sources that they can use in their exhibits and brochures and websites and other places. And there are so many different primary sources at the Library of Congress website, which I'm sure many of you are already really familiar with. So I'm just going to concentrate today in this short tutorial about looking through some of the map collections. And I just want to highlight some of the ones that I think are the most useful when you are trying to talk about local history and tie it into a larger national context. So I am going to take you to the Library of Congress website. And we're going to go through where you can find some of these things. And I'll show you a few examples of maps from some of my favorite collections that I'll share with you, including ones that really highlight kind of cities and towns. And again, that kind of how you get down on the ground and see what's changing in people's everyday lives. So to get to the map collections that have been digitized, you just go to the link to the digital collections in general, which is beneath this main banner. And then you want to narrow down the number of digital collections to the ones that are just in the map division. So if you go under part of on the left-hand side, and then you go to geography and map division, you'll end up with 26 collections that are mainly focused on map primary sources. So I'm just going to scroll through this a little slowly and point out some of the ones that I think are pretty useful, especially if you're a small museum or historic site in one of the states in our southern region. So there's a lot of Civil War history in the South, of course. So the Civil War Maps collection is really good. The Cities and Towns collection is excellent. It's got it covers a very wide time range as well, so you can find a lot of good historic maps. There are more Civil War maps in the Hotchkiss collection. There's really great Louisiana Purchase era maps from that part of the Mississippi River Delta. National parks. Panoramic maps is one of my favorite. We'll take a closer look at that. Railroad Maps is a fantastic collection for looking at the expansion of railroads, particularly in the 19th century, and how that contributes to the growth of towns. And Transportation and Communication does kind of the same thing, but looks at things beyond just railroads, looking at rivers and canals and other kinds of things. And then lastly, I'm going to show you the Sanborn Maps collection. So first of all, cities and towns. There's a wide variety of different types of maps looking at cities and towns from all over the world. And I am just going to search within this collection, for example, put Florida. And so we have 65 maps that come up on our search for the word Florida. And you can see these cover a wide variety of different types of maps. I'm going to narrow it down to a certain time period. Let's look at some early history of Florida maps from the 18th century. So you can see there are actually 3 maps from St. Augustine that were all created within 4 years of each other in the 1760s. One is a French map, one is an Italian map, and one is an English map. The last search result is actually from Washington, D.C., which has a Florida street. So that's an example of how sometimes your search results are not actually what you were looking for. Let's take a closer look at one of these, and we can zoom in, because sometimes when you are coming up with new exhibits and new kind of programming materials, what you need are really good images to go along with that. And so maps can provide that because they are so rich, and you can zoom in and look at a lot of really close details, and then you can do some cropping and using a kind of zoomed in versions of the maps. Like for instance, this lookout house that is on St. Anastasia Island, right across the river from the fort at St. Augustine. It's quite an elaborate drawing. There's the only other building that's depicted on this map is the fort, and you can see it's not quite as in as much detail, but it's got that signature shape. And you can look at the gates and the entrenchments and the ferry crossings and the marshlands and all the different rivers and all the things that would have been important for the people defending and traveling to this town in the 18th century. Now, there are a lot of other kinds of maps, but just for the sake of time, we're going to move to one of the other collections, panoramic maps. These are fantastic because they're bird's eye view maps of different towns from the late 19th and early 20th centuries at this time when towns were really growing during the Second Industrial Revolution. And so these were created by city boosters and by developers and by land salespeople to try to attract growth and development and increase population. So they're really depicting these towns as progressive areas, areas full of potential, and they're very beautifully drawn. So let me see. Let's take a look at a South Carolina example. We've got Columbia and Charleston, both from 1872. Let's take a closer look at Columbia. And just for a few seconds, I want to zoom in so you can see the types of details that they include. So we've got, government houses. You can see the names of the streets. You can see that they're tree lined. Down here you have the University of South Carolina. And you have churches, which you can see from their steeples, city parks. So they're really trying to show all the different amenities. Also, interestingly, you can see the lunatic asylum up here, which is a civic building, which was considered in a slightly different light in the 1870s than it is now. And of course, you want to show your transportation corridors. So here's a charming little train going through town. Again, you can zoom in and get a lot of detail and kind of crop out your picture and use those for exhibits and for showing to visitors. Okay, let's look at so Railroad Maps collection is what it says, looking at the expansion of America through railroads, particularly in the 19th century. For instance, this map from 1861 shows you the different kind of distribution of rail lines right at the eve of the Civil War. You can see it's much denser in the Midwest and in the Northeast than it is in the southern states. But if you zoom in, you can see all the little names of these towns that are developing along the railroad lines and how that's actually connecting people more than rivers used to do. Now, speaking of rivers connecting different places, in the transportation and communication collection, there is a map that I was looking at the other day that I want to show you that really emphasizes the role and importance of rivers in the early 19th century. So I'm just going to put in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So here's a map showing 3 southern states exhibiting the post offices, post roads, canals, railroads, etc. from the year 1839. So we're going to zoom in. And so right away you can see just how incredibly covered with rivers and river tributaries these states are. And then the straight lines are these roads that are connecting different post office towns. And just there's Natchez, Mississippi. So here we have part of the Natchez Trace. And so you can see the importance of these new forms of transportation corridors, as well as the older ones of the river, to tie all these different little towns together throughout all these counties and parishes. And you can really zoom in and get a whole lot of detail and see all these different town names from the 1830s. So that's a beautiful map. Lastly, in the short time we have together, I just have to show you the Sanborn Maps collection, if you aren't already familiar with it. Now, these were created starting in the late 19th, but mostly in the first half of the 20th century for fire insurance purposes. So they're going to show the materials that buildings were made out of for all sorts of towns of all sorts of sizes throughout the whole country. So, for example, let's take a look at Moultrie in Georgia. And so these are kind of like atlases in that they have several pages each, and the first page is the index page. So that'll show you kind of what page to turn to if you want to look at a particular part of town. So we're going to zoom in on page 7, which has the downtown courthouse square. And so you can compare this with the aerial view in Google Maps today to see what has changed and what has stayed the same. Like, for instance, if is the courthouse still there? Yes, it is. Is the Confederate monument still there? Yes, it is. Is the bandstand still there? Yes, but it's not here. It's actually located in the north eastern part of the square now. But you can see a whole lot of pink. That means brick buildings. The yellow stands for wood frame buildings. And the blue means stone buildings. And then, of course, all these numbers are different measurements. And so they also show different features like entrances and exits. And here we have a hotel. Here we have a garage. Here we have a moving picture company. And this is in the year 1920. So that would have been a really early kind of movie theater house for that. But these are really great if you can find one from an area that you're interpreting at your museum to show kind of change over time, because sometimes you have Sanborn maps from different decades and you can look and see how buildings and how landscapes change. But that's all the time I have for today. There's so many wonderful maps that you can use. And if you have any questions, you can email me at the email address you see down right on my little video tile. But you can also find my contact information at our website. Stay tuned. We'll be creating more web tutorials on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much.